In this video, we're going to evaluate expressions with negative fractional exponents. So at first glance, these might look a little scary, but believe it or not, we have all of the tools that we need to actually go through and solve these fractional exponents. Now remember, we have learned in the past that rewriting negative exponents to be positive exponents just makes them easier to work with. So here, what you need to notice is that we have a negative exponent with that 512. And what you hopefully should be remembering is that if we rewrite this as the reciprocal, or if we move that number with the negative exponent to the opposite side of the fraction, we will be able to rewrite it with a positive exponent. So here I can make 512 to the power of negative 1/3 into a fraction. And then if I move this entire term into the denominator, I'm turning it into its reciprocal, and as a result, this becomes 512 to the power of 1/3. It becomes a positive exponent as I move it into the denominator. And then from here, I know how to write a positive fractional exponent into a root. It becomes the third root of 512. And then from here, I have to figure out, okay, what number to the power of 3, or what number times itself 3 times gives me 512? Well, that's 8. So my answer becomes 1/8. Now here, if I look at the second example, I need to start by getting rid of this powers to powers, so I can multiply each of those exponents on the inside by a negative 1/4. So I have 81 to the power of negative 1/4 and 625 to the power of negative 1/4. And then again, what you're hopefully remembering is that if we can change these into their reciprocal or move them to the other side of the fraction, we can rewrite them with positive exponents. So here we rewrite this and it becomes 625 to the power of positive 1/4 in my numerator and 81 to the power of positive 1/4 in my denominator. Then from here I can rewrite them as roots. So I have the fourth root of 625 over the fourth root of 81. And then if I utilize my powers resource, I can evaluate my roots to be 5/3. So now we've got 4 more examples, and we're going to mix some negative number bases in there as well. So here if we look at example A, we see 1024 to the power of negative 1/5. And hopefully what you're immediately thinking is I need to rewrite these with positive exponents before I can begin to solve them. So if we rewrite this with a positive exponent, we end up with a 1 in our numerator and 1024 to the power of positive 1/5 in our denominator. We've moved that negative exponent into the denominator, we've flipped it to the reciprocal, so that now it has a positive exponent. Then from here, we can turn this into the fifth root of 1024. And then when we figure out what to the power of 5 gives us 1024, we realize that is 4, so we replace it with 4, and our simplified expression is just 1/4. Then if I look at example B, here I notice that I have a positive exponent. Here I have a negative number, but a positive exponent. So here if I multiply each power inside those parentheses by 1/3, I end up with negative 27, so the negative number to the power of 1/3, over 343 to the power of 1/3. Now what you need to be careful of as you're practicing problems that contain negative and positive fractional exponents is, I was tricky here on purpose. I purposefully put in a positive exponent. And you have to be aware of, okay, this is a positive exponent. I don't need to rewrite this with positive exponents because it already has one. So then from here, notice I left my negative number inside the parentheses. I now am going to rewrite these as roots. So I have the third root, and then the negative stays inside the root. Third root of 343. Then from here I find, okay, this is an odd root, so the negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 does in fact give me 27. And then in my denominator, 7 to the power of 3 gives me 343. 3. Now if I move on to part C, here I notice that I have a negative on the outside. So this is really a negative 1 times 100 to the power of negative 1/2. Then from here I notice, okay, I need this to have a positive exponent here. So I'm going to move that into my denominator. But what I am not going to do is I am not going to move this negative 1. That is just a negative number. It doesn't have a negative exponent. So I'm going to leave it as is. And I just move the 100 to now the power of positive 1/2 into my denominator. Then from here, I notice, okay, I have a negative 1 in my numerator, and I have 100 and the square root of 100 in my denominator. And if I evaluate the square root of 100, I end up with negative 1 over 10. And then finally, in my fourth example here, I start off by multiplying each exponent by a negative 1/6. So I have 1 to the power of negative 1/6 over 496 to the power of negative 1/6. I then realize I want to rewrite this with positive exponents, so I'm going to move them to the opposite sides of the fraction to turn them into their reciprocals. So now I have 4096 to the power of a positive 1/6 over 1 to the positive 1/6. Then from here, I can rewrite these as roots. So the 6th root of 4096 over the 6th root of 1. So I end up with 4 over 1, or just 4.